The Appalachian Mountains stretched endlessly with their dense, rugged forests. As dawn broke, Jack moved silently through the underbrush, his boots barely making a sound on the damp earth. The sun's early rays cast long shadows, and the forest stirred with the soft rustling of waking wildlife. Having hunted these woods for over 2 decades, Jack knew the terrain intimately. His goal today was a mature buck he'd been tracking for days based on fresh tracks he'd seen by the creek. Every step Jack took was precise and measured, reflecting his deep familiarity with the wilderness. The forest, thick with towering oaks and maples, created a canopy of green and gold, filtering sunlight into a dotted pattern. Jack's rifle was slung over his shoulder, and his camouflage attire blended seamlessly with the surroundings. His breath was steady, his heartbeat slow. He was entirely in his element. As Jack followed the fresher tracks more profoundly into the woods, he noticed broken twigs, stray hairs, and faint hoof impressions. His pulse quickened with excitement. The forest grew denser, the scent of earth and decaying leaves filled the air, and the distant sound of running water reached him. Then he spotted new tracks, larger, deeper, and indicative of a bear. Jack crouched to inspect them, noting their fresh appearance and wandering pattern. Black bears roamed these woods, though encounters were rare. His attention shifted from the deer to the bear as a sudden rustle in the bushes made him freeze. Jack readied his rifle and moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the dense foliage. Through a break in the trees, he spotted the bear about 30 yards away, its massive form partially obscured by bushes. The bear was foraging, its snout buried in the undergrowth. Jack marveled at the sight, but remained alert. Just as he decided to retreat, his foot slipped on a loose stone, creating a sharp noise. The bear's head snapped up, its eyes locking onto Jack. A tense standoff ensued, with Jack hoping the bear would lose interest. However, the bear's nostrils flared, detecting Jack's scent. Its body tensed, muscles rippling. And Jack knew the situation had changed. Bears are unpredictable. Their behavior is governed by instinct and circumstance. Jack understood this all too well, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The bear, perhaps perceiving Jack as a threat to its food, let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the trees. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the bear took a step toward him, its posture suddenly aggressive. He knew he had to act fast. Without thinking, Jack began to slowly back away, his rifle now raised slightly, ready to fire if necessary. He didn't want to shoot the bear. It wasn't necessary. If he could create enough distance, the bear might decide he wasn't worth the trouble. But the bear had other ideas. It took another step forward, then another, its growl deepening into a roar that sent birds scattering from the treetops. And then, in an instant, the bear charged. The speed of the attack was startling. One moment, the bear was several yards away. The next, it was thundering toward him, a blur of black fur and fury. Jack barely had time to react. He aimed his rifle, but the bear was too fast. It was on him before he could pull the trigger. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. The force of the bear's charge knocked Jack off his feet, sending him crashing to the ground with a bone-jarring thud. His rifle was torn from his hands, skidding across the dirt out of reach. The bear was on top of him, its powerful claws digging into his flesh, its teeth snapping inches from his face. The world became a blur of pain and chaos as Jack fought to free himself from the bear's relentless assault. Jack's survival instincts kicked in. He twisted and turned, using every ounce of strength he had to fend off the bear's attacks. But the bear was an unstoppable force, its claws ripping through his jacket, tearing into the skin beneath. Jack's vision blurred with the pain, but he forced himself to focus, to think. He knew that if he didn't find a way to escape, the bear would kill him. Somehow, in the chaos, Jack managed to roll onto his side, his hands scrabbling in the dirt for something, anything, that he could use to defend himself. His fingers brushed against a rock, smooth and cool under his touch. Without hesitation, he grabbed it, swinging it with all his might at the bear's head. The rock connected with a sickening thud, and for a split second the bear recoiled, stunned. It was the opening Jack needed. Ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, he scrambled to his feet, lunging for his rifle, which lay a few feet away. But the bear recovered quickly. It roared in anger, its eyes wild with fury, and charged again. Jack could feel its hot breath on the back of his neck as he reached for his weapon, his fingers closing around the stock just as the bear's claws raked down his back. He fell to the ground, the rifle in his hands, and rolled onto his back, bringing the weapon up just as the bear lunged at him. There was no time to aim, no time to think. Jack squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the forest, a loud crack that seemed to hang in the air. The bear flinched, a look of shock in its eyes as the bullet grazed its shoulder. It wasn't a fatal shot, but it was enough to make the bear hesitate, enough to break the momentum of its attack. For a moment, the bear and Jack stared at each other, both panting heavily, both bloodied and exhausted. Then, slowly, the bear began to retreat. It backed away, its eyes never leaving Jack, as if weighing whether to continue the attack. But finally, with a snort of frustration, it turned and lumbered off into the woods, disappearing into the underbrush as quickly as it had appeared. Jack lay on the ground, his chest heaving with each ragged breath. Pain radiated from every part of his body, but he was alive. He had survived. He knew he had to move to get out of the forest and find help before his injuries overwhelmed him. But for a few moments he just lay there, staring up at the canopy of trees above, his mind reeling from the ordeal. Vast, the cold dawn light filtered through the tall pines of Banff National Park, casting long shadows over the dense underbrush. The crisp air carried the fresh scent of pine needles and the lingering chill of the night. Levi and Arnold, part of a small group of campers, had risen early, eager for a day of hiking in the Canadian Rockies. After arriving at their campsite the previous evening and enjoying a night of laughter around the fire, they had retired to their tents, lulled by the wilderness sounds. The campsite, nestled in a valley surrounded by towering peaks, offered stunning views and easy access to popular trails. It was a serene spot that promised adventure and a break from daily life. As the sun rose, the campsite was peaceful, with only the rustling of leaves and occasional bird calls breaking the silence. The campers, still groggy, prepared breakfast and discussed their plans for the day. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon mingled with the earthy scent of the forest, creating a tranquil morning. However, amid this calm, a mistake had been made. In their excitement, the group had neglected food storage guidelines. A half-eaten sandwich and snacks were left on a picnic table. They had planned to address it in the morning, but they did not fully grasp the potential consequences of their oversight. The scent of the food drifted through the forest, attracting a grizzly bear, a powerful predator roaming Banff National Park. This grizzly, with a thick brown coat and rippling muscles, was drawn by the promise of an easy meal. Experienced in scavenging human campsites, it was quick to seize opportunities. In the early morning hours, while the campers were still asleep, the grizzly approached the campsite. Moving silently through the forest, the bear's heightened senses guided it toward the source of the enticing aroma. As it emerged from the trees and approached the campsite, its eyes fixed on the unattended food, a primal response ignited. The bear's pace quickened as it crossed the open ground, its breath visible in the cool air. The campers, focused on their morning routines, remained unaware of the approaching danger. It wasn't until one of them stepped out of his tent and spotted the bear that fear jolted through the group. Levi, who the fire pit had crouched, looked up just in time to see the grizzly bear emerge fully into the clearing. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he was frozen in place, his mind struggling to process the sight before him. The bear was immense, its size even more imposing up close, and its presence was utterly terrifying. The animal's eyes gleamed with a mix of curiosity and hunger as it sniffed the air, its gaze locking onto the unattended food on the table. Panic began to ripple through the group as the campers realized the gravity of the situation. Arnold, who had been gathering firewood a short distance away, dropped his bundle and rushed back toward the others. He too felt the cold grip of fear as he saw the bear advancing on their campsite. The grizzly, sensing the rising tension, paused for a moment, its ears twitching as it gauged the human's reactions. Levi and Arnold exchanged a glance, their unspoken understanding clear. They needed to scare the bear away. It was a desperate plan, born of the instinct to protect their friends and themselves, but it was also one fraught with danger. They knew the risks of confronting a grizzly, especially one that had already identified a food source. Yet the alternative, doing nothing and allowing the bear to rummage through their campsite, seemed just as dangerous. Levi, summoning all the courage he could muster, grabbed a large branch from the ground. He knew that bears could be intimidated by loud noises and aggressive posturing, but he also knew that it was far from a guaranteed deterrent. Arnold, following Levi's lead, picked up a metal pot and began banging it loudly, hoping to startle the bear into retreat. The grizzly, however, was not easily intimidated. It had encountered humans before and was familiar with their attempts to scare it off. Instead of retreating, the bear let out a deep, resonant growl, a sound that reverberated through the campsite like a thunderclap. The campers froze, their makeshift weapons suddenly feeling woefully inadequate in the face of such raw power. Without warning, the bear charged. The grizzly closed the gap with terrifying speed. Levi, standing closest, barely had time to react before the bear was on him. He swung a branch in a desperate defense, but the bear effortlessly batted it away. The force sent Levi crashing to the ground, pain searing through his chest as the bear's claws raked across him. His vision darkened as the bear loomed overhead. Arnold, seeing Levi's peril, rushed to help, wielding a metal pot. But the bear, fully committed, turned on Arnold with lightning speed. It bit down on his arm, the pain excruciating and fiery. The bear shook Arnold violently, dragging him to the ground. Despite Arnold's desperate kicks and strikes, the bear's immense strength overpowered him. Levi, though badly injured, pushed himself to his knees, his vision blurred. He grabbed a rock and hurled it at the bear. The rock struck the grizzly's face, causing it to release Arnold momentarily. The brief distraction gave Arnold a chance to scramble away, clutching his wounded arm to his chest. Blood oozed from the deep gashes where the bear's teeth had sunk into his flesh, and he could feel the strength draining from his body with each passing second. But the instinct to survive was strong, and he forced himself to keep moving, knowing that to stop would mean certain death. The campers initially panicked, but they regrouped and tried to drive the bear away with noise. They grabbed sticks, rocks, and metal objects, creating a desperate symphony of survival. The grizzly hesitated, disoriented by the commotion. After a bone-chilling roar, it turned and lumbered back into the forest. In the aftermath, Levi lay on the ground, bloodied and gasping, while Arnold, barely conscious, was cradled with a makeshift tourniquet. Shock and horror were evident on the campers' faces. Despite their severe injuries, Levi and Arnold were still alive. The group quickly contacted park rangers and emergency services, who responded swiftly. Within an hour, a helicopter arrived, airlifting Levi and Arnold to the nearest hospital. Tom Sweeney, an avid fisherman, cherished the solitude of Alaska's rivers, where the natural world provided a perfect escape from modern chaos. In late August, during the peak of the salmon run, he had found a secluded spot along a remote riverbank. The river was alive with salmon fighting upstream, and Tom, in his well-worn waders, was immersed in the tranquil rhythm of fishing. The scent of pine and the soft blue sky made for a serene setting. Tom had risen early to secure this prime location. Each cast of his fly rod was precise, and soon he had hooked his first fish of the day. Hours passed in peaceful solitude as the sun rose higher and his creel filled with glistening salmon. Unbeknownst to Tom, a large grizzly bear had been silently observing him. Drawn by the scent of the fish, the powerful apex predator moved stealthily through the forest. Its deep brown fur and muscular frame were almost invisible against the underbrush, and the unfamiliar scent of a human piqued its curiosity. The bear kept its distance at first, evaluating the situation. It was accustomed to catching salmon, but was intrigued by the easy meal that the human seemed to be enjoying. With each step, the bear moved closer to the riverbank, its eyes fixed on Tom with predatory intent. Tom remained oblivious to the danger. Focused on landing a huge salmon, he didn't notice the bear's approach. The river's roar masked the bear's movement, and the grizzly was now just yards away, preparing to strike. Tom's attention was entirely on the fish, unaware of the massive shadow looming behind him. The attack was sudden and violent. The bear charged with astonishing speed, its massive body hurtling through the brush and onto the riverbank. The ground shook beneath its weight as it thundered forward, closing the distance in mere seconds. Tom barely had time to register the blur of motion before the bear was upon him, knocking him off his feet with a force that sent him crashing into the icy waters of the river. Disoriented and shocked, Tom struggled to regain his footing as the cold water closed around him. The world spun in a chaotic swirl of noise and pain, the river rushing in his ears as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. His fishing rod slipped from his grasp, the line trailing uselessly in the current as he flailed, trying to find some purchase on the slick riverbed. But the bear was relentless, its massive paws swiping at him with deadly precision. Tom's survival instincts kicked in. He knew that to survive a grizzly bear attack, one had to fight back to make oneself appear as large and threatening as possible. But in the water, disoriented and panicked, such logic was hard to grasp. He reached for his knife, fumbling with numb fingers as the bear's claws raked across his back, tearing through the thick fabric of his jacket. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot fire that seared through his nerves and sent shockwaves of terror coursing through his body. Finally, he managed to free the knife from its sheath, gripping it tightly as he tried to turn and face his attacker. The bear loomed over him, its maw open wide to reveal rows of sharp teeth, its breath hot and rank against his face. Tom slashed at the bear with all the strength he could muster, the blade finding its mark in the thick fur, but the bear was unfazed, its primal rage overriding any sense of pain or injury. With a powerful swipe of its paw, the bear knocked the knife from Tom's hand, sending it spinning into the river. Tom was defenseless now, reduced to little more than helpless prey in the face of the bear's fury. He struggled to escape, kicking and thrashing in the water, but the bear was too strong, too determined. It reared back on its hind legs before coming down with crushing force, its jaws closing around Tom's neck in a death grip. The world around Tom seemed to slow to a crawl, the sounds of the river fading into a distant hum. His vision darkened, the edges of his consciousness slipping away as the bear's teeth sank deeper into his flesh. There was no escaping the inevitable now, no hope of rescue or salvation. The bear's primal strength overwhelmed him completely, its massive body pinning him to the riverbed as it delivered the fatal bite. Tom's body went limp. The fight drained from him as life ebbed away. The bear, satisfied with its kill, dragged his lifeless form from the river and into the forest. The once peaceful riverbank was now a scene of violence and death, the water stained with Tom's blood as it rushed downstream. The bear, driven by its hunger, tore into Tom's flesh, feeding on the body with a savage intensity that only the wilderness could foster. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the river. The bear, having satisfied its hunger, left the remains of Tom's body deep within the forest, hidden from sight. The wilderness reclaimed the scene, the sounds of the river and the wind through the trees, returning to their natural rhythm. But the violence of the attack lingered, a stark reminder of the brutal reality that lurked beneath the surface of Alaska's pristine beauty. When Tom Sweeney failed to return as expected, his family grew alarmed. Known for his punctuality and routine, Tom's disappearance was out of character. As hours passed and night fell, anxiety turned into fear. By morning, they reported him missing, triggering a search and rescue operation in the remote wilderness where he had last been seen. Search teams scoured the dense forest and rugged terrain, with helicopters overhead and search dogs on the ground. Despite their efforts, days passed with no sign of Tom, dimming hopes of finding him alive. The breakthrough came at the riverbank, where they discovered bloodstains, torn clothing, and grizzly bear tracks. Following the trail into the forest, they found Tom's remains. The evidence of the bear's brutal attack was clear, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The news of Tom's death shocked his family and community. A cherished figure, Tom's loss was profound and served as a stark reminder of the dangers of Alaska's wild landscape, where the beauty of nature is coupled with its inherent risks. Descent on July 8, 2024, the Komarov family ventured into the heart of the Siberian wilderness. The day was warm, and the forest teemed with the hum of insects and the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. For Igor Komarov and his family, this trip was an escape from their hectic lives, a chance to reconnect with nature. Igor, a sturdy man in his late 40s with rugged strength, had long dreamed of showing his children the untouched beauty of Russia's wilds. His wife Alina, a quiet but resilient schoolteacher, shared his enthusiasm. Their children, 12-year-old Victor and 10-year-old Anya, were brimming with curiosity and excitement for the adventure. The journey to their campsite had been long and arduous, involving treks through dense forest and across winding rivers. They finally arrived at a secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines, offering a breathtaking view of distant mountains. There were no signs of civilization, just the Komarovs and the vast Siberian wilderness. As they set up camp, the children gathered firewood and explored their surroundings under their parents' watchful eyes. The crisp, fresh air was filled with the scent of pine needles and the earthy aroma of the forest floor. Igor, skilled in outdoor survival, built a fire pit, while Alina unpacked provisions, spreading bread, cheese, and cured meats on a blanket. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, the family settled down for dinner. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the cool evening air. The aroma of cooking meat mingled with the forest's scents, carried away on the breeze. Unbeknownst to the Komarovs, a massive grizzly bear in the distance had picked up the scent of their meal. This creature, perfectly adapted to its harsh environment, was driven by a relentless hunger. It moved silently through the underbrush, its dark fur blending with the forest floor. The bear's acute senses allowed it to detect the faint sounds of laughter and see the flickering firelight between the trees. With each step, it drew closer. The Komarovs, oblivious to the danger, continued their meal as the light faded and the forest grew quieter. The usual sounds of wildlife diminished as nocturnal creatures began to stir. The fire's glow created a small island of warmth and comfort in the encroaching darkness. The bear was now so close it could smell the sweat on their skin and the faint hint of fear. It paused at the edge of the clearing, its eyes gleaming in the firelight as it observed the family with a predatory intelligence. Then, with a burst of speed that belied its size, the bear charged forward, crashing through the underbrush. The attack was sudden and ferocious. The bear lunged into the clearing, a force of nature that shattered the calm. The Komarovs had mere seconds to react. Igor, nearest the fire, was the first to recognize the danger. His heart raced as he turned, realizing the gravity of the situation. In that critical moment, his thoughts were consumed with protecting his family. As the bear closed in, chaos erupted. The once serene evening was now a tumult of primal fear and desperate action. The family scrambled to react, their evening of relaxation turning into a fight for survival against a relentless predator. Instinctively, Igor grabbed a burning log from the fire, brandishing it like a weapon. The bear, undeterred, met his defiance with a roar that shook the very trees. It swiped at him with a paw the size of a dinner plate. Claws extended, the blow connected with Igor's chest, sending him sprawling backward with air driven from his lungs. Pain exploded through his body, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had to fight. Alina screamed a sound that echoed in the vast emptiness around them as she tried to shield the children. But the bear was relentless, its hunger and fury driving it to tear into anything that moved. Igor struggled to his feet, ignoring the blood that soaked his shirt, and swung the burning log at the bear's face. The flames licked at its fur, singeing the tips, but the bear barely flinched. Instead, it reared up on its hind legs, towering over Igor, and brought both of its massive paws down with a force that could shatter bone. Igor collapsed under the blow, the log falling from his hands as he crumpled to the ground. The bear turned its attention to Alina and the children, who were frozen in place, their eyes wide with terror. For a brief moment, the clearing was filled with a terrible silence, the kind that precedes an inescapable doom. Then the bear attacked again, its primal instincts taking over as it closed in on the remaining members of the Komarov family. Alina tried to shield her children, using her body as a barrier between them and the beast. But the bear was unstoppable, its jaws snapping at anything within reach. It struck Alina with a force that sent her tumbling to the ground, her body limp as she hit the earth. Victor and Anya, too young to comprehend the full horror of what was happening, could do nothing but watch as the bear's rage was unleashed upon them. The animal's immense power was overwhelming, and in mere minutes the lives of the Komarov family were extinguished in a flurry of violence and blood. The bear, hunger-sated, dragged the bodies into the forest, leaving the once serene campsite a scene of unimaginable carnage. The fire continued to burn, casting flickering shadows on the trees as if the forest itself mourned the loss of the lives it had claimed. When local hunters arrived the next day, they were met with a profound silence. The clearing, once alive with the sounds of a family and nature, was now a grim tableau of death. The brutal remains of the Komarovs were scattered, torn apart by the bear's ferocity, and the ground was stained with blood. The hunters, seasoned in the wild's harsh realities, followed the bloodied trail more into the forest, their faces etched with grim determination. Knowing the bear, having tasted human flesh, would now be more dangerous, they proceeded cautiously. They eventually found the bear resting in a thicket, its bloodied fur marking its recent violence. The immense beast, with eyes reflecting primal intelligence, was a formidable threat. With heavy hearts, the hunters ended the bear's life, eliminating the danger it posed. News of the Komarov family's tragic end quickly spread, shaking the region. The incident underscored the lethal risks of remote wilderness, highlighting Siberia's brutal reality, where only the strong survive, and even then, survival is never assured. The expanse of ice in extreme conditions is a realm where only the most resilient survive. Polar bears, apex predators in this unforgiving environment, face the harshest of challenges. A month-long expedition led by seasoned explorers aimed to document the effects of climate change in this hostile region. The team was aware of the dangers: biting cold, shifting ice, unpredictable weather, and the looming threat of polar bears. The team comprised 5 members: Graham, the experienced expedition leader; Aubrey, the young climatologist; Derek, a marine biologist studying the region's wildlife; Andre, an Arctic photographer; and Lamar, an expert in glaciology. Their mission was clear: gather crucial data on the Arctic's changing conditions. Each day, they ventured onto the ice, meticulously documenting the transformations occurring in the environment. Every aspect of the expedition was planned with precision. The team was equipped with cutting-edge thermal imaging technology, durable tents, flare guns, and early warning systems for detecting large animals. Yet, in the unpredictable Arctic, even the best-laid plans could falter. As the weeks progressed, the team observed alarming changes. Ice floes, once solid and stable, now cracked and drifted more frequently. Temperature fluctuations were more extreme, and wildlife sightings were scarce. Derek noted the absence of seals, a critical prey for polar bears. This absence suggested that hungry bears might become increasingly desperate and aggressive. One evening, while setting up camp on a drifting ice floe, the team was enveloped by the dim light of Arctic twilight. The horizon was a vast white expanse, occasionally interrupted by distant icebergs. Despite the serene appearance, there was an underlying tension. The day's grim findings had added weight to their mission. The team worked swiftly to establish their camp. They chose the floe for its stability, but were aware that the ice's unpredictability required them to remain alert and ready to move. Graham, ever vigilant, ensured that tripwires and flares were correctly placed, knowing that their presence might attract the Arctic's apex predators. As night fell and temperatures plummeted, the team huddled in their main tent, analyzing the day's data and planning for the days ahead. The flow's increasing drift added urgency to their discussions. They needed to act strategically to complete their mission before the end of the expedition. Unbeknownst to the team, a large male polar bear was prowling the flow's edges. Driven by hunger and desperation, the bear had been traversing the ice for days in search of seals. The bear's acute sense of smell had detected the explorer's scent from afar, guiding it toward their camp with relentless determination. The bear, its thick fur blending with the ice, approached the camp stealthily. The explorers remained unaware of the predator's presence, focusing on their work and discussions. The Arctic's vast and silent expanse held both beauty and danger, a constant reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability. As the bear approached the camp, it moved with a cautious, almost stealthy gait. It knew the terrain well, navigating the cracks and crevices in the ice with ease. The bear's massive paws, designed for traction on the slippery surface, made barely a sound. Its sharp and alert eyes scanned the camp, taking in the tents and the equipment. The bear could sense the presence of the humans, and its instincts were on high alert. Inside the tent, the team remained oblivious to the danger lurking outside. They were focused on their work, unaware that the bear had drawn dangerously close. The tripwires and flares, their first line of defense, were in place, but the bear, driven by hunger, was undeterred. It circled the camp, its nostrils flaring as it picked up the scent of food and human sweat. The bear's muscles tensed, its predatory instincts kicking in as it prepared to strike. As the night deepened, Graham decided to check the camp's perimeter one last time before turning in. He stepped out into the frigid air, his breath visible in the cold. He moved methodically, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, scanning for any signs of movement. He knew that in the Arctic, vigilance was essential to us, survival. But the bear, sensing the movement, had already set its sights on a different target. Lamar had ventured out to retrieve some equipment from a sled that had been left near the edge of the camp. He moved quickly, wanting to get back inside where it was warm. But as he approached the sled, the bear, driven by its primal need to feed, made its move. The attack was swift and brutal, a blur of motion in the dark. The polar bear lunged at Lamar with a force that belied its size, its mighty jaws clamping down on his shoulder and driving him to the ground. Lamar's survival instincts surged, but the bear's overwhelming strength made resistance nearly impossible. Its claws tore through his clothing and flesh, inflicting excruciating pain that radiated through his body. Lamar struggled, his hands flailing uselessly against the bear's thick fur. The creature's grip was relentless, its teeth sinking deeper with each second. His mind was a chaotic swirl of pain, fear, and disbelief. Despite his awareness of the risks and his preparedness for a potential encounter, nothing could have readied him for this brutal reality. The rest of the team heard the commotion and rushed outside, but by the time they reached Lamar, it was too late. The bear, sensing their approach, emitted a deep guttural growl that echoed across the ice. With a final, savage shake of its head, it dragged Lamar's lifeless body away into the darkness. The team was left in shock, struggling to process the horror of what had occurred. The icy wind carried the scent of blood and the bear's growl, a grim reminder of their vulnerability. They realized that pursuing the bear would only lead to further tragedy. The stark reality of their situation hit hard. They were alone in one of Earth's most remote and unforgiving regions, at the mercy of a predator with no compassion. Seeking refuge, they retreated to their emergency shelter, a reinforced tent designed for extreme conditions, but offering little solace in the face of such violence. Huddled together, they shivered from both the cold and the raw fear that gripped them. The air was thick with shock, each member haunted by the memory of Lamar's screams. Graham, the leader, knew immediate action was necessary. He ordered an evacuation and sent out a distress call to their support team stationed miles away. The support team, well-versed in Arctic dangers, responded swiftly. Yet even as preparations for evacuation began, the weight of Lamar's loss hung heavily over them. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they awaited rescue. The ordinarily peaceful Arctic sounds now felt ominous, as if the ice itself was closing in on them. The bear's attack had left a searing mark on their minds, a constant reminder of the peril that lurked in the Arctic's icy expanse. Their unity, once their strength, now felt fragile in the face of such a devastating loss. When the rescue team arrived, the explorers were physically unharmed, but emotionally shattered. They had come to the Arctic to study climate change and witness the environment's transformations. Still, instead, they were confronted with the brutal reality of survival in one of the planet's harshest landscapes. Rachel, drawn to the wild, had always found solace in the Sierra Nevada mountains with their rugged peaks and shadowy valleys. The allure of solitude and the challenge of navigating this terrain had long captivated her. Well prepared and experienced, she had meticulously studied maps, learned trails, and readied herself for any scenario. On this particular morning, the sky was a brilliant, endless blue. Rachel chose a remote trail she had hiked before, winding through thick pine forests and beside crystal-clear lakes where solitude reigned and only nature's sounds were present. As she walked, Rachel remained vigilant, aware of the wildlife that inhabited the Sierra Nevada. Armed with bear spray, a whistle, and a knife, she followed safety protocols to avoid startling a bear. The day was uneventful until she entered a shaded stretch and spotted a large black bear about 20 yards away. The bear, moving slowly, seemed unaware of her presence. Rachel froze and reached for her bear spray, her hand trembling. Unlike previous encounters, this bear did not retreat, but instead locked eyes with her, signaling a potentially dangerous situation. The bear's eyes were dark and unblinking. Rachel felt a surge of adrenaline as the bear took a step toward her. She tried to remember her training. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself look more prominent. But the bear wasn't following the usual script. It didn't pause, didn't hesitate. It kept coming, a low, menacing growl rumbling from deep within its chest. Rachel slowly began to back away, her heart pounding in her ears. The bear followed, its massive paws crunching on the forest floor. She raised her arms, trying to appear larger, trying to dissuade the bear from advancing, but the bear's demeanor had shifted. There was no fear, no curiosity, only aggression. She fumbled with the bear spray, her fingers clumsy with fear. The bear was close now. Too close. Rachel knew she was in grave danger. She aimed the spray and squeezed the trigger, releasing a cloud of fiery mist directly into the bear's face. The bear recoiled, shaking its head and snorting. For a brief moment, Rachel thought she had succeeded. The bear staggered back, pawing at its face. But the relief was short-lived. The bear, enraged by the burning in its eyes and nose, let out a roar and charged. Rachel barely had time to react. The bear barreled into her with the force of a freight train, knocking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard, the wind driven from her lungs in a painful rush. The bear was on her in an instant, its massive weight pinning her down. Rachel fought with everything she had. She kicked and thrashed, trying to push the bear off of her. She could feel the bear's hot breath on her face and smell the musky scent of its fur. The bear's claws raked across her chest, tearing through her jacket and into her flesh. She screamed in pain, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the trees. The bear's jaws closed around her arm, its teeth sinking deep into her flesh. She tried to pull free, but the bear's grip was like a vice, unrelenting and merciless. Every instinct in Rachel's body screamed at her to fight, to survive. She swung her free arm at the bear, hitting it with weak, desperate blows. She reached for the knife at her side, her fingers slick with blood as she fumbled to pull it from its sheath. The bear shook its head, tearing into her arm, and Rachel's vision blurred with the pain. With a final surge of strength, she managed to draw the knife. She stabbed at the bear's side, driving the blade into its thick hide. The bear roared, a sound of fury and pain. It reared back, releasing her arm, and Rachel seized the opportunity. She tried to crawl away, dragging herself across the ground, but her body was broken, her strength sapped. The bear lunged at Rachel, knocking her to the ground with a powerful swipe. Dazed, she saw the bear's massive form blotting out the sky, its bloodied muzzle dripping with her blood. Realizing her fate, Rachel fought with a knife, but her strikes were ineffective. The bear casually knocked the knife from her hand and clamped its jaws around her neck. The excruciating pain overwhelmed her, and darkness began to close in as her heart pounded fiercely. As the bear's grip tightened, Rachel's thoughts turned to her family, the mountains she loved, and the countless times she had walked these trails. Then, everything faded away. Later that day, other hikers found Rachel's body, having heard the struggle and the bear's roars, but arriving too late. The community was shocked by the tragedy, mourning the loss of a seasoned hiker. Authorities set up patrols and issued warnings, ultimately tracking and euthanizing the bear for public safety. Rachel's death was a sad reminder of the wild's unpredictable dangers. The wilderness of Kamchatka, a remote expanse in Russia's Far East, was a place where nature's raw power reigned supreme. This rugged land, with its active volcanoes, towering mountains, and dense forests, was home to the formidable Kamchatka grizzly bear, known for its enormous size and unpredictable nature. Sergei Alexeyevich, a seasoned hunter, thrived in this harsh environment. Known for his quiet resolve and systematic approach, he was a solitary figure deeply connected to the land he navigated. Today, Sergei embarked on his routine bear hunt, armed with his rifle and heavy pack. The hunt was not just a practice, but a pursuit of mastery over the wilderness. Navigating the dense forest, Sergei, familiar with every sign and sound, moved purposefully. Hours passed in silence, disturbed only by the occasional bird call or rustling wind. As he approached the riverbank, the air grew colder, carrying the damp scent of the river and the subtle hint of a predator's presence. Crouching low, Sergei found fresh bear tracks, massive impressions in the soft earth. His senses heightened, and his movements became more deliberate, signaling that the hunt was about to intensify. He continued forward, following the tracks with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. The river, swollen from recent rains, rushed noisily through the landscape, its currents swift and cold. Sergei moved parallel to it, eyes darting from the tracks to the dense foliage ahead. It was here, near the water's edge, that he unknowingly made a critical mistake. The terrain was unfamiliar, and as he maneuvered through a narrow passage between two large boulders, he found himself in a small, secluded clearing. The scent of the river masked the presence of the bear. Sergei didn't see it at first, the massive creature camouflaged by the thick brush. It was when he stepped into the clearing that everything happened at once. The grizzly, enormous male, easily weighing over 800 pounds, had been resting by the riverbank, its thick fur soaked from a recent foray into the water. Startled by Sergei's sudden appearance, the bear rose to its full height on its hind legs, towering over the hunter. There was no time for Sergei to react. In an instant, the bear's primal instinct took over, and it charged with a speed and ferocity that belied its size. Sergei, frozen in that brief moment of recognition, barely had time to raise his rifle before the bear was upon him. The impact was devastating. The bear's massive paw swiped across Sergei's chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. His rifle was knocked from his hands, clattering uselessly to the side. The initial strike had broken several ribs, and Sergei's body screamed in agony as he tried to push himself up. Blood dripped from deep gashes across his torso, and the sharp pain in his side made it difficult to breathe. But there was no time to process the injury, no time to think. The bear, driven by a mix of fear and rage, did not relent. It came down on Sergei with its total weight, its powerful jaws snapping inches from his face. Instinct took over. Sergei reached for his knife, the only weapon he had left. His fingers, slick with blood, fumbled at his belt, but he managed to free the blade just as the bear lunged again. With all the strength he could muster, Sergei slashed at the beast's side, the knife sinking into the thick fur and muscle. The bear roared in pain, rearing back momentarily, but the wound was superficial. It only seemed to fuel the creature's aggression. Before Sergei could make another move, the bear swiped again, this time striking his leg. The force of the blow sent a sharp pain shooting through his body, and he felt the bone crack. The bear's jaws clamped down on his shoulder, the teeth puncturing deep into muscle and flesh. Sergei's vision blurred, the searing pain overwhelming his senses, but he fought against the rising tide of unconsciousness. He had to survive. He had to keep fighting. The river, once a distant murmur, was now dangerously close. In their struggle, Sergei and the bear had moved to the water's edge. Icy spray hit Sergei's legs as the bear dragged him toward the shallows. Despite his efforts to resist by clutching at mud and rocks, the bear's immense strength and the powerful current overwhelmed him. The freezing water surged around them, intensifying the bear's attack. Sergei's strength waned as the cold drained his energy, turning each breath into a struggle. The bear's relentless assault pulled him deeper into the river, and Sergei's limbs grew numb, his vision blurring. The roar of the river and the bear's growls merged into a chaotic symphony as his world darkened. In his final moments, Sergei's thoughts lingered not on fear but on the wilds that had shaped his life. When authorities arrived, alerted by Sergei's absence, they found a grim scene. The riverbank was stained with blood, and the disturbed earth and broken branches marked the violent struggle. Sergei's body was partially submerged downstream, the cold waters having carried him away. His rifle lay untouched several feet away from the attack site. The tracks revealed the bear's path. It had retreated into the forest, wounded but alive. The authorities, well versed in Kamchatka's dangers, issued warnings to the community. Sergei's tragic end served as a stark reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability. The village, once secure in its knowledge of the land, now faced an uneasy reality. Even the most experienced hunters could fall victim to its untamed power. The Canadian wilderness, with its towering pines, jagged ridgelines, and still lakes, felt like a different world to those accustomed to urban life. A group of corporate executives seeking a challenging week of wilderness survival training arrived in this remote expanse, unaware of how intense their experience would become. Guided by 3 instructors, Gunnar Alaric, a stern, seasoned guide, Licky Borchard, an expert in foraging and shelter building, and Abram Martel, a skilled tracker, the executives embarked on a team-building adventure. They were equipped with basic survival skills but were unprepared for the rawness of their environment. The first 2 days were productive. Gunnar taught navigation using stars and a compass. Licky demonstrated shelter construction with deadfall and branches, and Abram led tracking exercises. The executives, though tired and sore, were proud of their progress. However, on the 3rd night, things began to unravel. After a strenuous day, the group settled near their campsite for dinner. Despite warnings, some food scraps were left out, the scent of roasted meat lingering in the air. Exhaustion and a sense of accomplishment led to complacency. As the fire died and the group retired to their shelters, a calm wind rustled through the forest. The night was clear and peaceful, but Abram, the experienced tracker, felt an uneasy sense of familiarity with the distant rustle. This sound suggested something significant was moving through the forest. Far from the camp, a grizzly bear prowled, Its powerful nose detected the lingering scent of food, drawing it closer to the campsite. The bear, solitary and hungry, moved with deliberate steps through the trees, its massive form casting an ominous shadow as it approached. The bear's approach was slow but inevitable. In the vastness of the wilderness, predators like the grizzly had long learned patience and caution. It circled the camp from a distance, analyzing the scene with primal intelligence. The smell of meat mixed with the human scent had brought it here, and its hunger overcome any fear it might have harbored. It continued its slow, deliberate approach. Within the camp, everything was still. The fire had long died out, and the stars above provided the only light. A faint breeze stirred the tree branches. The instructors and executives lay inside their shelters, oblivious to the approaching danger. The bear moved with a quietness that belied its immense size. It sniffed at the air, edging closer to the remnants of the evening's dinner. The improperly stored food, still faintly warm from the fire, was the perfect bait. Without warning, the bear ransacked the area, upending pots, pans, and bags in search of nourishment. The sound was sudden and violent, a crash of metal and fabric. Gunnar was the first to awaken. His instincts kicked in before his mind could fully process the scene. The smell, the sound. He knew exactly what was happening. His heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed for the bear spray that was always close at hand, but the bear was quicker than anyone could have anticipated. It had found food, and its hunger made it bold. The camp exploded into chaos. As the bear tore through the campsite, it came upon the first unlucky participant. A man named Tobin Winslow, one of the younger executives, had pitched his shelter too close to where the food had been left. In a matter of moments, the bear had him pinned beneath its weight, its jaws sinking into his leg with terrifying force. His screams pierced the night, waking the others with a jolt of terror. There was no mistaking the sound. They were under attack. The executives, once confident in their newly acquired skills, were now paralyzed by fear. The bear's immense size and ferocity shattered any illusions they had of controlling their environment. In the dim light, they could see the massive silhouette of the bear, its eyes glowing with a predatory gleam, its fur bristling as it ransacked the area. Tobin's body was flailing, blood pooling beneath him as the bear thrashed him around like a rag doll. Instructors Gunnar, Lakey, and Abram sprang into action, their training kicking in as the situation escalated. The bear spray, their last defense, was quickly deployed. Gunnar tried to approach Tobin, but the grizzly's attention shifted to Astrid Forrester, who had made the fatal error of running. In the chaos, Astrid fled toward the trees, but the bear, reacting to the movement, charged after her with terrifying speed. It knocked her to the ground with a brutal swipe, sending her sprawling. The bear loomed over her, jaws dripping, ready to strike again. The scene was chaotic. Gunnar's hand trembled as he discharged a cloud of bear spray, the pungent mist forcing the grizzly to recoil momentarily, its eyes watering. Yet the spray wasn't enough to fully drive the bear away. With the bear dazed but still present, Gunnar and Abram dragged Tobin, who lay bleeding and unconscious, away from immediate danger. Lick hurried to assess Astrid's injuries. She lay still, likely suffering from broken bones. The remaining participants huddled together and were gripped by shock. Their perception of the wilderness was now a harsh reality of survival. The bear, still nearby and watching warily, had retreated but not disappeared. The instructors faced a critical choice: stay and fortify the camp, risking another attack, or abandon it and seek safety, leaving behind their injured companions. As dawn broke, the sight of the bear's attack was stark. The campsite was a mess of scattered pots, torn fabric, and blood-stained ground. Tobin lay on a makeshift stretcher, pale and sweating, his leg severely wounded and him in shock. Astrid, with a broken arm and multiple bruises, was immobile and groaning faintly. The group, though physically unharmed, moved like ghosts through the wreckage, their initial sense of adventure replaced by the grim reality of survival. They now faced a stark choice: confront nature's indifference or become another statistic in the relentless Canadian wilderness. The Alaskan wilderness had always been a cherished retreat for Terrence Byrne and Finnegan Whitaker. Friends since childhood, they had spent decades embarking on fishing trips to the world's most secluded spots. This year, they ventured to the Chillicothe River deep in Alaska's backcountry, seeking the peace and solitude of its pristine banks. Upon arrival, the morning air was crisp, with a heavy mist cloaking the river. The men set up camp by a tranquil bend, a location they had carefully chosen weeks in advance. Terrence, stocky and broad-shouldered, marveled at the untouched landscape, while Finnegan, leaner and wiry, prepared their gear. Both in their late 40s, they showed signs of aging, but still retained the stamina for their outdoor adventures. The hours passed quietly, marked only by the gentle lapping of water and the occasional cast of a fishing line. The river teemed with trout, their silvery bodies darting beneath the surface. The friends were absorbed in their routine of casting and reeling, relishing their annual escape from everyday life. As noon approached, the fog lifted, revealing the towering pines and rugged peaks in the distance. The wilderness felt timeless, its vastness making them feel both small and alive. However, the wild is notoriously unpredictable. Terrence, engrossed in fishing, barely noticed the faint rustling in the underbrush. Finnegan, however, spotted movement in the dense forest, a massive grizzly bear foraging for berries. The bear, though large and imposing, was a reasonable distance away and seemed disinterested in the men. Grizzly bears were common in the area, and the men were familiar with wilderness safety. They had taken all necessary precautions, storing food properly and keeping noise to a minimum. Finnegan's heart raced, but he remained calm. The bear, while a powerful symbol of the wild, appeared focused on its search for berries. The grizzly occasionally sniffed the air, but seemed more intrigued by the berries than by the fishermen. Finnegan glanced at Terrence, who nodded in silent agreement. They continued fishing, avoiding sudden movements or noise, allowing the bear to go about its business. The afternoon wore on, and the bear gradually disappeared into the thicker foliage, leaving the men to enjoy their solitude once more. But there was an underlying tension now, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The wilderness felt less predictable, more ominous, as though the vast forest was watching them. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the water, Terrence and Finnegan began to pack up their gear. They moved methodically, still cautious from the earlier encounter. The light was fading, and they knew better than to linger too long in bear country at dusk. The river's banks, once bathed in sunlight, were now cloaked in an eerie stillness. The sounds of birds had ceased, and the air had grown colder. Then from the forest's edge, the grizzly reappeared. It was closer this time, its dark eyes fixed on the two men. Finnegan's heart sank. Something was different. The bear was no longer foraging, it was watching them. Its massive body swayed as it moved toward the river, slow but deliberate. Every instinct in Finnegan's body screamed for him to stay calm, but a rising sense of dread began to take hold. Terrence, ever the pragmatic one, motioned for them to keep packing, his movements deliberate but strained. They had to leave, and quickly. The bear, now at the river's edge, stopped and sniffed the air again, its nostrils flaring. Time seemed to stretch in those few moments, every second of a lifetime, as the men continued packing, trying not to provoke the animal. But the bear's disinterest was gone. Without warning, it lowered its head and began to move toward them, first slowly, then picking up speed. Its massive paws pounded the earth, each thud sending tremors through the ground. It was charging. Terrence barely had time to react. One moment he was securing his fishing rod. The next, a grizzly bear struck him like a freight train. The impact knocked him off his feet, sending him crashing into the river. The icy water exploded around him as the bear dragged him further into the depths, its immense strength overpowering Terrence's desperate struggles. Frozen in shock, Finnegan could only watch as the bear, driven by primal rage, clamped its jaws onto Terrence's shoulder and pulled him deeper into the river. The water churned red with Terrence's blood, each violent thrash of the bear's claws ripping into him. Panic surged through Finnegan. He wanted to help, but knew any attempt would end in his death. The bear's savage assault left no room for hope. Terrence's attempts to free himself only seemed to escalate the bear's aggression, the creature's roars echoing through the valley as it tore into him. Finnegan's breath quickened, adrenaline fueling his decision to flee. There was no saving Terrence now. He turned and sprinted toward the forest, his boots splashing through the water. The sounds of the river and the bear's growls faded as he plunged into the dense woods. Branches lashed at him, and the uneven terrain threatened to trip him, but he pushed forward, driven by a singular focus: to get help. Hours later, exhausted and disoriented, Finnegan stumbled upon a ranger station. He collapsed at the door, breathless and incoherent. as he relayed the horrifying details of the attack. Authorities responded quickly, but they knew the grim reality of grisly encounters. A search team was dispatched to the river, but the chances of finding Terrence alive were slim. The river, once turbulent, was now eerily calm. Bloodstains and torn clothing marked the scene, but the bear and Terrence were gone. The wilderness had swallowed the tragedy, leaving behind only its harsh scars. The authorities issued warnings about the dangers of fishing in a bear country. The attack, though rare, was a stark reminder of the wilderness's unpredictability. Terrence's body was never recovered, lost to the river and the wilds. Finnegan, haunted by the events, never returned to Alaska. The fishing trips that once defined his friendship with Terrence now lingered as painful memories overshadowed by the tragic loss. A thick mist clung to the edge of the Alaskan wilderness, blurring the boundary between the expansive forest and the small town of Harvold. Life in Harvold was a delicate balance between man and nature, with the townspeople respecting the wilderness's power and knowing the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Here, predators roamed freely, and survival was a constant challenge. Lucas Griegson, a seasoned hunter whose family had lived in these lands long before Harvold existed, was deeply attuned to the land. Known for his prowess in hunting and trapping, Lucas could take down a moose with a single shot and track wolves through blizzards. Yet recently, Lucas sensed something was amiss. A few weeks ago, livestock began disappearing at the edge of town. Initially suspected to be wolves or a mountain lion, the signs soon revealed a far more brutal presence. Animals weren't just killed. They were mauled and torn apart, their remains scattered across the frozen ground. Lucas examined the grisly evidence up close. Deep claw marks, shattered bones, and the unmistakable signs of a grizzly bear, most likely a rogue one. While grizzlies were common in the area, they typically avoided human settlements, preferring the more profound wilderness. But this bear seemed different. It had ventured closer to town, possibly due to sickness or a new relentless hunger. The bear's increasing proximity was a growing concern for the city. Tensions mounted. The townspeople locked their doors at night, kept children close, and avoided the forests. Hunters were on high alert, and patrols around the town increased. Yet a pervasive unease lingered, knowing that something was watching from the vast wilderness. That tension reached a peak one bitterly cold evening. The wind howled, and darkness swallowed the last remnants of daylight. Harvold huddled in its small valley, its wooden cabins lit by flickering lights. The snow crunched underfoot as the Hansen family, living on the town's edge, went about their evening routine. Unbeknownst to them, they were being observed. In the cover of the forest, the rogue grizzly moved silently, its massive form gliding through the trees. Drawn by the scent of food and the barking of the family dog, it had been watching the Hansen property, preparing for its next move. The bear was no longer the majestic creature of the wild it once was. Hunger, rage, and perhaps madness had taken hold. Its once thick fur was matted and patchy, its eyes gleamed with a feverish intensity, and its movements had become erratic, unpredictable. It had grown bold, far too daring, and now it was only feet away from the town. In the fading light, the grizzly emerged from the forest, its hulking form barely visible against the backdrop of snow and trees. The Hansen's dog, a loyal and energetic Malamute, caught sight of the bear first. It barked wildly, hackles raised, warning its owners of the approaching danger. But the bear was not deterred by the noise. It charged, moving with horrifying speed for something so significant. The attack was swift and brutal. The bear barreled through the backyard, jaws snapping as it seized the dog in its powerful grip. The Malamute yelped in pain, its body flailing as the grizzly shook it violently. Blood sprayed across the snow, painting the once peaceful yard in a gruesome tableau. Inside the house, the Hansens heard the commotion. The bark turning into high-pitched cries, the thud of something heavy slamming into the ground. They rushed to the window, their hearts sinking as they saw the massive shape of the grizzly in their yard. The bear stood over the broken body of their dog, its muzzle covered in blood. For a moment, it seemed as though time stopped, the sheer shock of the sight freezing them in place. But the bear wasn't finished. It lifted its head, its nose twitching as it caught the scent of the humans inside the house. Without hesitation, it turned its attention toward the home, moving toward the sliding glass door at the back of this property. The fragile barrier between the family and the deadly predator seemed laughable in the face of such raw power. Lucas, who lived just a short distance away, had been outside when he heard the dog's frantic barking. He knew that sound. It was a sound of imminent danger. Without thinking, he grabbed his rifle and bolted in the direction of the noise, his heart pounding in his chest. He could already guess what was happening, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him when he reached the Hansen property. The towering and monstrous bear was only a few feet from the house, its breath visible in the cold air, mingling with the blood of the fallen dog. The Hansens were trapped inside, helpless as the beast approached. Lucas raised his rifle, taking aim at the bear's massive form. He had hunted bears before, but never like this. Never one that was so close to the town, so utterly unafraid. He fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the silent forest. The bullet struck the bear in the side, a clean hit, but it wasn't enough. The grizzly roared in fury, spinning toward Lucas with terrifying speed. In an instant, the predator had abandoned its assault on the house and charged toward him, its eyes burning with rage. Lucas barely had time to react. He fired another shot, but the bear was already upon him. Its massive paw swiped at him, claws tearing through his coat and flesh. The force of the blow sent him sprawling into the snow. His rifle was knocked from his hands. Pain shot through his body, but there was no time to dwell on it. The bear was on top of him, its weight crushing, its breath hot and stinky. The bear attacked Lucas with ferocious abandon, its claws and teeth tearing through his flesh. Lucas struggled against the beast, grappling with its thick fur, but its strength was overpowering. As they fought, they tumbled into a nearby creek, the cold water rushing over the rocks. Lucas tried to escape, his hands scrabbling for purchase, but the bear's grip was ironclad. It dragged him under the icy water, pushing him down with relentless force. The cold was a sharp shock, but the bear's weight pressing him beneath the surface was far worse. The water churned as the bear used its massive paws to keep Lucas submerged. His lungs burned as he fought for air, but the bear pressed him more profoundly, the icy water filling his mouth and nose. His vision blurred, and the world around him faded as the bear's monstrous form loomed above. Eventually, Lucas's struggles ceased, his strength drained by the cold and the bear's assault. Sensing victory, the bear released his lifeless body, which floated away with the current. As night fell, the bear vanished into the forest, leaving Harvold in fear. The town, now on high alert, began a desperate hunt for the rogue Grizzly, living in constant dread of the beast's return. A group of climbers had meticulously planned their ascent for months, studying the Rocky Mountains' contours and plotting every route to one of its most challenging peaks. Led by Bram Morrow, an experienced mountaineer, the team included Kylan Thorne, a focused veteran, Merritt Hagen, a seasoned wilderness guide, Cassidy Lohr, a young but skilled alpine climber, and Soren, whose quiet demeanor masked his extensive mountain knowledge. Their journey began on a crisp morning as they set out toward the towering peak. Carrying gear for a week-long expedition, food, tents, ropes, climbing equipment, and bear spray, they faced the Rocky Mountains' daunting yet exhilarating challenge. For days, their climb progressed smoothly. They navigated steep ridges, narrow passes, and icy trails, synchronizing their movements as they scaled rock faces and trudged through the snow. At night, they camped in sheltered spots, conserving warmth as temperatures plummeted. The distant wildlife sounds were their only company, and danger seemed distant. On the fifth day, they approached the most challenging section, a nearly vertical ascent along a narrow ridge. They reached a plateau near a river, intending to camp for the night. The rushing water offered a brief reprieve from their exertions. As dusk fell, Soren secured the tent ropes while Merritt and Bram scouted for a fire spot. Cassidy admired the river's beauty while filling a water canister, feeling an uneasy chill she attributed to exhaustion. Kylan, ever vigilant, noticed an eerie silence in the forest. Scanning the tree line, he saw a massive grizzly bear emerging from the brush, its dark fur matted and its size overwhelming. The bear, likely drawn by their scent or noise, approached their camp with deliberate steps. Kylan signaled frantically to the others, silently mouthing "bear" and pointing. The team froze, their training kicking in. Bram reached for the bear spray, signaling everyone to do the same. Despite their preparedness, the sight of the massive beast invoked a palpable tension, a stark reminder of the wild's unpredictable nature. They stood in a tight formation, hoping that their presence would deter the bear from coming any closer. But the grizzly was undeterred. Its nostrils flared as it sniffed the air again, detecting something it liked. Perhaps the scent of food in their packs. It began moving toward them with increasing speed, its massive paws thudding against the ground. Bram and the others knew they had to stay calm, but adrenaline surged through them, heightening their senses. The bear was closing the distance rapidly, and it was clear that this was no bluff charge. The animal's ears were flat against its head, its gaze locked onto them. Without warning, the bear broke into a full sprint, covering the ground between them in seconds. Merritt, thinking quickly, deployed his bear spray, a plume of aerosol mist hissing into the air in the bear's direction. The grizzly hesitated, but only for a moment. It reared up on its hind legs, roaring in anger, its massive frame towering over them. The bear spray had only managed to enrage the beast further. In a moment of pure terror, Soren, who had been standing closest to the bear, made a panicked decision. He turned and ran, his legs propelling him toward the cliffs that bordered the river, his mind overwhelmed by the primal instinct to flee. The others shouted in their minds, knowing that running was the worst possible reaction, but there was nothing they could do to stop him. The bear, its predatory instincts fully engaged, immediately gave chase. Soren's footfalls were frantic as he sprinted toward the cliffside, his breath ragged in his chest. Behind him, the bear closed in, its powerful body moving with frightening speed. Every fiber of Soren's being was focused on escape, but the terrain was unforgiving, the cliffside offering little in the way of shelter. Within moments, the bear was upon him, swiping at him with a massive paw. The blow sent him sprawling, his body slamming into the ground with a sickening thud. He scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from where the bear's claws had raked his back, but the cliffside offered no refuge. Soren reached the edge of the precipice, his boots slipping on loose gravel as he peered down at the raging river 30 feet below. The water churned violently, a deadly current awaiting him. Behind the bear growled menacingly, its presence a thunderous reminder of the danger he faced. Cornered with no escape, Soren turned to confront the bear, hoping to intimidate it or find a way around. But the grizzly was relentless. It lunged again and Soren lost his footing, teetering on the cliff's edge. With one final mighty shove, the bear sent him hurtling into the river below. The icy water enveloped him instantly, dragging him under before he could react. The current tossed him violently, and his gear weighed him down, making it impossible to fight the mighty river. From the cliffside, the remaining climbers watched in horror as Soren vanished beneath the turbulent waters. The bear, seemingly satisfied, lingered briefly at the edge before retreating into the forest. The climbers were left stunned and paralyzed with fear, their sense of invincibility shattered by the brutal loss of their friend. The once majestic wilderness now seemed hostile and unforgiving. Bram, pale and troubled, motioned for the group to pack up. Their movements were mechanical, devoid of hope or purpose. No one dared to search the river. They knew the fast-moving water had likely carried Soren far away, beyond any hope of recovery. The climb to the summit was abandoned. A tense silence marked the descent, every sound amplified, every rustle or snap of a branch causing hearts to race. The mountain, once a symbol of their goal, now loomed overhead as a stark reminder of their loss. By the time they reached the base, they were physically and emotionally exhausted, their minds burdened by the tragedy that had unfolded. The memory of Soren's death would forever haunt them, a grim reminder of nature's unforgiving power. A group of 5 set off early in the morning from the Denali National Park trailhead. The sky was painted in soft pinks and blues, gently illuminating the towering peaks of the Alaska Range. The trail, popular with experienced hikers, led them through the rugged wilderness up into the mountains. The late summer air was crisp but not biting, adding to their excitement for the adventure ahead. At the trailhead, they had noted a recent bear sighting on the notice board. As seasoned hikers, they were familiar with such warnings, but took them in stride. Denali was bear country, home to many grizzlies, and encounters, while rare, were part of the risk. The group, led by Eric, a tall and experienced hiker from the Midwest, with friends August, Colleen, and siblings Dakota and Elias, had packed bear spray and adhered to safety protocols, including making noise and staying together. The hike started smoothly. They traversed through spruce and birch forests before emerging into the alpine tundra, where the vast mountains seemed to engulf the sky. The untouched beauty of the Alaskan wilderness was awe-inspiring, a stark contrast to the modern world. As they gained elevation, they noticed fresh bear tracks in the soft earth, large, unmistakable prints that meandered off into the brush. Colleen, the most cautious, pointed them out. Though the tracks were recent and clearly from a grizzly, Eirik reassured the group and they continued, feeling secure with the sun high and the group together. Hours later, the trail became steeper and rockier, the air thinner and the terrain jagged. The group slowed, stopping occasionally to catch their breath or admire the views. The initial tension from the bear tracks faded, replaced by the routine of hiking. Eirik led, Dakota and Elias stayed in the middle, while Colleen, feeling fatigued, lingered behind. Unbeknownst to them, a massive, emaciated grizzly had been tracking them. Driven by hunger and desperation, it had picked up their scent earlier, drawn by the smell of food and human presence. The bear, whose ribs were visible through its ragged fur, had become more aggressive and bold in its search for an easy meal. As the afternoon light cast long shadows, the bear's patience snapped. It moved closer, its massive paws silent on the forest floor, eyes fixed on the lagging Colleen. Absorbed in her exhaustion, she hadn't noticed the subtle changes in her environment, the sudden silence of the birds or the shifting wind. The bear's approach was slow and deliberate. With each step, the threat grew closer, hidden by the thick brush. The group, immersed in their hike and their growing fatigue, remained oblivious to the predator stalking them from the shadows. Suddenly there was a crack, a sharp snap of a branch, and Colleen turned, her eyes wide. A moment of eerie silence hung in the air before the underbrush exploded with movement. The grizzly charged. Colleen barely had time to react. Her body froze for a split second, instinctual terror rooting her to the spot. Then she ran. The others were too far ahead to hear the initial crash of the bear's approach. By the time Colleen screamed, it was too late. The bear, propelled by hunger and primal aggression, was upon her in an instant. It barreled through the brush, its enormous form a blur of fur and muscle, knocking her to the ground with a force that drove the air from her lungs. The impact was brutal. Colleen felt the weight of the beast press down on her, its claws tearing into her pack and ripping through the fabric like paper. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, her hands fumbling for the bear spray at her side. But the grizzly's ferocity overwhelmed her. The scent of wet earth and the musky odor of the bear filled her nostrils, mixing with the coppery tang of blood. The others, alerted by the noise, turned to see the horror unfolding behind them. Eirik shouted something incomprehensible, his voice carried away by the wind as he and the others scrambled back down the trail. But the bear's focus was singular. It had chosen its prey. In the chaos, Colleen managed to wriggle free for a moment, rolling to her feet and staggering toward the riverbank, her breath ragged and panicked. The river, swollen from recent rains, roared nearby, its waters fast and unforgiving. But there was no time to think. The bear was on her again, its jaws clamping down on her shoulder with a sickening crunch. The pain was blinding. Colleen screamed as the bear dragged her toward the water, its claws digging into her flesh. She kicked and fought, but the grizzly was relentless, its hunger driving it into a frenzy. With a final violent shove, the bear and Colleen tumbled into the river. The icy water engulfed them both, the current immediately pulling them downstream. Colleen thrashed in the water, trying desperately to stay afloat, but the bear, still latched onto her, dragged her down. The river churned violently, sweeping them along the jagged rocks and over submerged logs. Colleen's body slammed into the debris, her vision going in and out of focus as the cold and shock took hold. The others reached the riverbank just in time to see the horrifying scene. Eirik, August, Dakota, and Elias stood helplessly, watching as the bear and Colleen were carried downstream. They shouted and screamed her name, but there was nothing they could do. The river was too fast and too dangerous. They could only watch as the bear, still gripping Colleen in its jaws, disappeared around a bend, the water swallowing them both. For what felt like an eternity, the group stood frozen, paralyzed by the horror they had just witnessed. Their minds struggled to process the brutality and speed at which everything had happened. Eirik was the first to break from the trance, pulling out his phone and shaking hands to call for help, though deep down, they all knew it was too late. Park officials arrived hours later, long after the river had calmed and the sun had begun to dip below the horizon. Search teams scoured the area, but as night fell, the chances of finding Colleen or even recovering her body grew slim. The river was notorious for its hidden dangers, and the bear, driven by hunger and instinct, would not have left much behind. The following day, Denali National Park officials launched a review. The incident, though rare, was a stark reminder of the wilderness's unpredictable dangers. Warnings about bear sightings were updated, and discussions began about implementing stricter trail safety protocols. Bear activity in the area was increasing, and hikers were urged to take even greater precautions. But for the group, those changes came too late. Colleen was gone, her life claimed by the unforgiving wilderness of Denali. The park, which was as beautiful and awe-inspiring as it was, had shown its darker side. A reminder that in this vast, untamed land, nature ruled supreme, and even the most experienced hikers were not immune to its dangers. It was May 3rd, 2018. At 28 years old, Jeffrey Smith had always been the jealous type. He was an insecure young man. A bad experience with a high school girlfriend had left him feeling less than everyone else. Since then, he believed the only way for him to be safe in a relationship was to have total control. So when he met 25-year-old Anna Cyrus 2 months prior, his initial excitement at having a new partner quickly gave way to suspicions and obsessions. That day, the couple, who were originally from Ohio, were visiting a zoo. It was a way for them to relax, a day to reconnect and enjoy each other's company. From the beginning of their relationship, Jeffrey felt threatened by any man who even glanced at her. He hated that Anna was always smiling and laughing, her eyes sparkling as she spoke. He hated that people gravitated towards her, especially men. When she talked to a waiter, he seethed. When she spoke to a mutual friend, he interrogated her afterward, accusing her of wanting something more. His jealousy was overbearing, but he could also be charming and loving. Anna loved him and wanted to weather the bad times. She thought going to the zoo and enjoying some fun and quality time would be the answer to all her worries. But for Jeffrey, the day was already spoiled. As they made their way toward the Grizzly enclosure, he seethed with rage. It started when they asked a zoo employee for directions to the bear enclosure. The employee, a young man with a friendly face, chatted with Anna as he explained the way. Jeffrey felt like his insides were boiling. He convinced himself that Anna was flirting. Her laugh was too genuine and her smile was too wide. By the time they arrived at the grizzly bear enclosure, Jeffrey's head was filled with rage. He felt the usual prick of insecurity transform into something ugly. The bears were massive, lumbering masses of fur and strength, roaming slowly around the rocky landscape of their enclosure. Families with young children gathered behind the safety railings to take pictures and marvel at the spectacle. But Jeffrey didn't pay attention to the creatures. His eyes were fixed on Anna. His mind warped every recollection from the day, heightening his paranoia. His breathing became shallow and his heart raced in his ears. They walked to a calmer area, away from the mob, where they could see the grizzlies more clearly. Anna was still attempting to keep things light, unaware of the storm gathering inside Jeffrey. But then he snapped. He accused her of flirting with the zoo staffer, his words cutting and his face twisted with rage. Anna recoiled at the venom in his voice, and that was when she realized his jealousy wasn't something they could overcome together. She looked at him and realized he was dangerous. This was irrational. The argument quickly escalated, their voices rising. The tension was obvious, and people began to notice it. The crowd watched wearily as Jeffrey and Anna fought. Anna tried to defend herself, explaining that she had simply been polite, but he would not listen. Jeffrey's rage prompted endless accusations, each more ludicrous than the last. Anna became increasingly scared for her safety. Just as she started considering leaving, it was then that something in Jeffrey snapped. His eyes shifted from Anna to the enclosure below. They locked eyes, and then, in a split second, Jeffrey shoved Anna with both hands. Anna's scream cut through the air as she lost her footing and toppled over the low barrier. She plummeted, hitting the rocky ground with a sickening thud. The crowd watched in horror and gasped as they realized what had happened. Someone immediately called the police. Jeffrey stood frozen, but it wasn't the shock or regret that he was feeling. Instead, he hoped the grizzly would take care of his problem once and for all. Anna lay startled, crying in pain from the fall. She felt her leg was most certainly broken with the way it hurt. Her head throbbed, and there was a warm drip of blood down her temple. She could barely understand what had just happened, and then she heard it. a loud rumbling growl. She turned around and found herself face to face with a massive grizzly. The bear stood a few feet away, its dark eyes fixated on her. It appeared intrigued, more puzzled by her unexpected entrance than aggressive. It smelt the air before gently approaching her, its heavy paws padding on the dirt. Anna's breath hitched. She tried to remain as still as possible while her mind raced with panic. Visitors above began to scream. Some cried while others raced for help. Others simply took out their phones to record the horrible spectacle unfolding below. Anna watched them, then shifted her glance to the approaching animal. Surely this was it. She was going to die, and all because of a man she had met only 2 months before. Then the bear leaned closer, its massive snout inches from the woman's torso. Anna could feel its hot breath on her skin, and every nerve in her body told her to run. But she couldn't. The zoo staff reacted promptly. Zookeepers hurried to the scene. One of them used food to distract the bear, and another prepared a tranquilizer. The seconds felt like hours. The grizzly's focus shifted, and its big head turned towards the approaching feast of berries and fish. Anna allowed herself to breathe then. She was unable to move, her body locked in terror. But maybe it was for the best. She didn't want the animal to consider her more appealing than the food. Then, a dart flew through the air, striking the bear in the flank as it ate. A few minutes later, the animal swayed slightly before collapsing, sedated but unharmed. 2 staff members immediately climbed down into the enclosure, reaching Anna and assessing her injuries. She was conscious but dazed, with her body battered and wounded. They lifted her carefully, and the crowd cheered in relief. As she was brought out, Anna's gaze was drawn to Jeffrey. She noticed him standing motionless, his face pale, his eyes wide. There was no mistaking the horror in his expression. Not fear for her, but fear for himself. Within minutes, the police arrived. Jeffrey did not fight as they handcuffed them. The crowd reacted with both amazement and disgust. Parents shielded their children's eyes from the sight. Phones were out, videos were streaming live, and the news traveled quickly. Jeffrey was detained on the spot, facing charges of attempted murder. He had turned a corner from which there was no return. Anna was rushed to the hospital. Her leg was indeed broken, and she had a mild concussion, but she was safe, away from Jeffrey, who had proved to be more dangerous than a grizzly. On September 12th, 2023, Cody and Clara, a hardworking couple in their early 30s living a simple life, took their 2 kids on a hike through the remote forests of Wyoming, one last adventure before the cold Wyoming winter set in. But unbeknownst to them, their much-anticipated trip would transform into a living nightmare. Cody worked long days as a mechanic, his hands soiled with grease and his back bowed from hours spent under a car's hood. Clara worked as a waitress at a neighborhood restaurant where she was constantly on her feet, serving coffee and chatting with regulars. Despite their tough jobs, they found joy in the little things: Sunday morning pancakes, fishing trips, and most importantly, their 2 children, Freddie, 11, and Joy, 5. Wyoming, with its harsh terrain and extensive wilderness, was their home. Its towering mountains, deep forests, and wandering wildlife gave them a sense of freedom that counterbalanced the monotony of their daily lives and the hardships of their jobs. That day, the family chose a remote trail deep in the woods, away from the typical tourist destinations. Cody liked places like this, quiet, wild, and untouched. He wanted his children to experience Wyoming's natural splendor, to breathe the fresh air, and to hear the noises of the forest. But they were also aware of the risks. Wyoming was home to grizzly bears, which were fierce carnivores that roamed the wilderness. They'd heard stories about bears attacking hikers, but Cody was confident they could handle the situation. They carried bear spray and were cautious. The walk began well enough. The sky was bright and the early sun shone through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Freddie ran ahead, full of energy, while Joy skipped beside her mother, holding her hand. Cody followed behind, admiring the view and keeping an eye out for anything unusual. As they moved farther into the woods, the trees became denser and the noises of civilization disappeared. The air was dense with the aroma of pine and damp ground. Clara noticed the silence first. The birds had stopped chirping, and the wind appeared to be holding its breath. There was a palpable tension in the air, as if they were not alone. Unexpectedly, a large grizzly bear appeared in the distance. It was a towering beast, weighing well over 600 pounds, with a thick coat of dark fur and strong muscles rippling beneath its hide. It stood on its hind legs, sniffing the air, its small eyes locking onto the family. The bear was undoubtedly startled by their appearance. It likely perceived them as a threat, unwanted guests in its territory. Cody's heart beat madly as he realized the horrible danger they were in. Grizzlies were unpredictable, especially on their turf, and this one was already acting aggressively. He realized they needed to get out of there quickly. Cody took a quick step forward, grasping his walking stick like a weapon. He knew it was flimsy, a poor defense against such a big animal, but it was all he had. His gaze was fixed on the bear, his body tight and ready. He turned to Clara with a serious look in his eyes, and she immediately understood. She grasped Freddy's hand and snatched up Joy, her legs moving before her thoughts could catch up. She knew the car was a couple of miles away, parked near the trailhead where they'd started. They had to get there quickly if they were going to survive. Clara ran, her breath ragged and her heart thumping in her chest. Freddy struggled to keep up, his legs burning with each stride, as Joy clutched to her mother, screaming in uncertainty and dread. Clara pushed them forward, every instinct telling her to keep going. She didn't look back because she couldn't. She knew if she looked back, she would be unable to leave Cody behind. But she needed to save the kids. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the forest, shaking her to the core. She understood what it meant. The bear was charging. Cody stood his ground behind them, waving his walking stick and shouting in an attempt to appear larger and more dangerous. It didn't work. The bear lunged, its enormous body moving at an impossible speed. Cody swung the stick at the bear's face, but it was like hitting a brick wall. The bear reared back and slammed into him with such ferocity that Cody was knocked to the ground in an instant. Cody pushed himself to his feet, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He realized he needed to buy Clara and the kids more time. Clara and the children continued to run, the forest blurring around them. The trail seemed to last forever. Every one of their steps was filled with exhaustion and dread alike. Freddy faltered and nearly fell, but Clara hauled him back up, urging him to keep going. She looked at Joy, whose face was buried against her shoulder. Joy's tiny body trembled. Clara's lungs hurt and her muscles screamed, but she pushed harder, motivated by sheer desperation. They came to a clearing, and she saw the car in the distance. There it was, their only hope. She sprinted the final few yards. She managed to open the doors and cram the kids inside before slumping into the driver's seat. Her fingers dialed 911. Her voice panicked as she relayed their location and begged for help. Back on the trail, Cody's fight was coming to an end. The bear was unstoppable, its gigantic paws hitting with bone-crushing force. Cody tried to defend himself by raising his arms to protect his face, but he couldn't match the animal's strength. His vision clouded, and his body weakened with each strike. Blood spilled from his wounds and stained the ground under him. He could scarcely breathe, and each gasp was a battle. He felt his consciousness go, but he clutched onto one thought. His family was safe. That's all that mattered. When the authorities finally arrived, the situation was dire. They discovered Cody's body in the mud, bruised and lifeless. The bear had disappeared back into the woods, leaving behind a trail of blood and broken branches. The rescuers moved fast, scanning the area to ensure the bear had left. They covered Cody's body, their expressions grim with the weight of what had happened. Clara was in shock, sitting in the back of the ambulance with Freddy and Joy clinging to her. She knew in her heart what would happen, but seeing it confirmed destroyed something inside her. Cody had given his life to save them, fighting a grizzly bear with just a walking stick. His bravery and his devotion to his family had cost him his life. It was the ultimate sacrifice, one she and the kids would forever be grateful for. On August 31st, 2024, it was a typical late summer afternoon in the park of the city where Julia Collins, a 20-year-old college student, lived. It was the end of summer, and numerous people, Julia among them, came to the park to enjoy the gentle warmth and the diffuse light. But what none of them knew was that an apex predator was on the loose, ready to wreak havoc among them. The sun hung low in the sky that day, casting long, warm shadows on the grass. Families were spread out on blankets, enjoying picnics. Children chased each other near the playground, their laughter filling the air. Joggers moved to the beat of their music while cyclists glided down the paved walkways. The park was bustling with activity, a microcosm of city life set against a backdrop of tall trees and rolling hills. It seemed like the entire city was enjoying the park that day. Julia had come to the park with a group of friends, eager to escape the pressures of school and enjoy a relaxing day outdoors. She was a 20-year-old college student studying environmental science in Washington State. She was passionate about animals and conservation, having grown up in a small town near the Cascade Range, where encounters with nature were commonplace. Her father, a park ranger, instilled in her a strong appreciation for the natural world. She was familiar with the principles of the wild: remain calm, never run, and always respect an animal's space. But she never dreamed she'd have to use these teachings in the midst of a crowded city park. Julia and her friends had set up by a small pond and spent the afternoon talking and sharing stories. As the day progressed, Julia decided to go for a stroll, removing herself from the company to clear her mind and enjoy some alone time. She wandered towards the playground, which was quieter and away from the crowded picnic areas. It was unusual for the playground to be so empty, but Julia didn't mind. A bit of solitude was what she wanted. But the peaceful scene was soon disturbed. A chilling scream pierced the quiet afternoon. Heads turned, eyes widened, and chaos ensued. At first, Julia thought maybe someone was hurt. But then, she saw the reason behind the chaos. A massive, fierce grizzly bear was lumbering through the park, its nose lifted into the air. The animal seemed puzzled by the unfamiliar aromas of food, sweat, and terror. Julia couldn't believe her eyes. What was a grizzly bear doing in the middle of a crowded city park? Her mind raced to make sure of what she was seeing, and then it all clicked. There was a wildlife sanctuary on the outskirts of the city. The animal had most likely escaped from the wildlife sanctuary, getting past the electric fences that were supposed to keep it captive, and now there it was, roaming freely among the stunned park-goers. Panic spread like wildfire. People grabbed their children and fled, abandoning picnic baskets and bicycles. Joggers came to a halt, undecided whether to run out of the park or stop. The bear, puzzled and plainly agitated, moved its big head from side to side in response to the commotion and movement surrounding it. Its hair bristled, and its muscles rippled beneath its thick hide as it came closer to the playground, as if to get away from the commotion surrounding it. Now isolated from her friends, Julia realized she was dangerously close to the bear. She felt relieved that no kids were in the playground area, a small mercy. The atmosphere was eerily quiet. She and the bear were the only beings in the playground area. Around them, chaos reigned. Julia's heart hammered in her chest as she realized the animal was slowly making its way towards her. She was alone, with no clear path of escape. Julia instinctively remembered her father's teachings. She knew not to run or shout. Her body trembled with fear, but she kept her breathing steady. She gradually began to back away, making herself appear as non-threatening as possible. The bear's gaze fixed on hers, its breath heavy, its nostrils flaring as it detected her scent. It moved closer, trapping her near the edge of the playground where a row of tall bushes served as a natural barrier. There was nowhere to go. Despite the circumstances, Julia stayed calm, inching backward, her gaze never leaving the animal. She made herself small, raising her hands slightly to indicate that she was not a threat. Her mind raced through everything she had learned about bear behavior. Avoid eye contact, but keep it in sight, move slowly, and never turn your back. She maintained a steady pace, her heart beating in her ears as every muscle in her body clenched. Meanwhile, park rangers and police were already on their way, prompted by a flood of 911 calls. They arrived at the park in minutes, sirens blasting. They rapidly assessed the situation, setting up barriers to contain the bear and keep the anxious crowd at a safe distance. The police formed a perimeter to direct people away from the danger zone, while park rangers prepared tranquilizer guns, knowing they only had one chance to get this right. The bear continued to approach Julia, appearing more curious than aggressive, but Julia knew how fast things might change. She felt the cold sweat on her skin, each second extending into an eternity. Then she heard the harsh crack of a tranquilizer rifle from behind her. A dart shot through the air and struck the bear in the flank. The bear grumbled, spun around, and swatted at the air in confusion. Julia paused for a while, expecting the bear to charge. The tranquilizer took several agonizing moments to work. The bear struggled and swayed on its huge legs, attempting to shake off the effects. Another dart hit, and the bear let out a loud, rumbling growl before dropping onto its side, its breathing heavy and slow. Rangers rushed rapidly to secure the animal and ensure it was completely sedated before signaling that the area was safe. Julia, still shivering, was led away by a park ranger. Her friends, who had been anxiously seeking for her in the turmoil, raced to her side, ecstatic to learn she was safe. The crowd watched in awe and concern as rangers and police worked together to transfer the bear back to the sanctuary. News crews gathered to document the unusual event, and the story quickly spread, raising concerns about wildlife safety and the impact of urban growth on animal habitats. The park was closed for the remainder of the day, and authorities launched an inquiry into how the bear had escaped. City officials and wildlife experts debated the necessity for improved safety measures and the growing problem of human encroachment into wild habitats. For Julia, the meeting served as a sharp reminder of wildlife's unpredictable nature. She had grown up learning the delicate balance between humans and animals, but now she had experienced it firsthand. The day concluded with the bear safely returning to the sanctuary, uninjured, and the park gradually returning to normal. Before going to sleep that night, Julia called her dad and thanked him for all of his teachings on animal safety. In late June 2015, Patrick Martin, a 52-year-old seasoned trophy hunter, arrived in Alaska to try to hunt for his biggest trophy yet, a grizzly bear. But when Patrick came face to face with a formidable beast, his overconfidence and entitlement got the better of him, and the man was left to fend for himself against a formidable creature. Patrick had spent his life pursuing dangerous games. His walls were decorated with mounted heads of deer, moose, and even a lion from a trip to Africa. But for his newly built cabin, tucked deep in the Montana mountains, Patrick envisioned something special, a grizzly bear skin in front of the fireplace. For Patrick, Alaska was the ideal location to find that prize. The state was known for its rough terrain and large numbers of grizzly bears, making it a haven for people wishing to hunt North America's most deadly predator. The hard climate and abundant food shaped Alaska's grizzly bears, which were known for their size and power. They were solitary creatures that roamed the tundra, forests, rivers, and mountains, commanding respect from anybody who dared to cross their path. Among them were true giants, bears weighing up to 1,500 pounds with thick fur and muscles that rippled with each step. These bears were not just animals, they were a symbol of Alaska's untamed wilderness. After days of hiking, trapping, and tracking prints, Patrick discovered what he was looking for. It was a giant grizzly, larger than any he had ever seen before. The bear's fur glistened in the faint Alaskan sun with deep browns and touches of silver. Its sheer size was stunning. Standing on all fours, its shoulders alone rose about 5 feet off the ground. The bear moved with the smooth, confident stride that only a creature of enormous power could have. Patrick experienced a rush of excitement. This was the one. This would be his crowning accomplishment. He carefully set up his rifle and positioned himself downwind. The bear was about 150 yards away, browsing a patch of berry bushes. Patrick aimed, his finger poised over the trigger as adrenaline rushed through his veins. But as he caught his breath and readied to shoot, the wind shifted. It was a subtle change, yet enough to carry a scent to the bear. The bear's head shot up, its nostrils flaring as it detected the human aroma. Its eyes latched on Patrick, narrowing in recognition of danger. Before Patrick could respond, the bear lunged across the ground between them with alarming speed. In the blink of an eye, it was upon him. Patrick pulled the trigger, but the shot missed as the bear's huge frame crashed with him, knocking him off balance. He felt the weapon fall out of his grasp as he slumped backward into the hard, uneven ground. Patrick rushed to his feet, his heart hammering as he saw how serious his mistake was. He noticed his weapon lying a few feet away, but there was no time to reach for it. The bear was already pivoting, ready for another charge. He was aware that a second close-range attack would be fatal. His gaze flew around, looking for an exit. That's when he noticed the tree, a huge spruce with broad, sturdy limbs approximately 10 feet above ground. Bears could climb trees, but Patrick could see no other way out. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the tree, adrenaline pushing his body to its limits. He reached the tree and leaped, clutching the lowest branch. His muscles burned as he lifted himself, his boots scraping against the bark. He climbed further, his hands quivering, not daring to look down until he was about 20 feet above. He finally came to a halt, perched on a big branch, breathing heavily, his heart thumping in his chest. Below him, the bear circled the tree's base, snarling and pawing at its trunk. The grizzly looked up, its eyes blazing with rage. It was now close enough for Patrick to see foam developing at the corners of its mouth. It rose to its hind legs, towering over the ground, and swiped at the trunk with its huge claws. The tree shook with the impact, but it held firm. Patrick understood that while black bears could climb trees, grizzlies rarely did because of their massive size and weight. They depended on physical power and speed over agility. Still, it didn't make him feel any safer. The bear was persistent, its displeasure palpable as it clawed at the tree, sending splinters flying. Patrick's thoughts raced. He had no way down and no weapon to defend himself. His only option was to outlast the bear. He knew grizzlies were extremely patient predators that could wait for hours, if not days. He needed a strategy to distract the bear long enough to flee. He looked around to check his surroundings. The vast branches above him provided some cover, but they would not last forever. He needed to go to the ground and get his gun. The minutes turned into an hour, and the bear showed no sign of leaving. It repeatedly circled the tree, occasionally standing on its hind legs to swipe at the trunk. Patrick remained perfectly motionless, muscles aching, attempting to conserve his energy. How long until the bear decides to give climbing a try? He needed the bear to lose interest. Patrick looked at his rifle. It remained where he had dropped it, not far from the tree. He had an idea. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a little half-eaten energy bar, his only source of nutrition. It was far-fetched, but he had no better ideas. He carefully split it into pieces and flung one as far as he could. It landed with a soft thud about 20 feet from the tree. The bear's ears perked up and turned around, briefly distracted by the sounds. Patrick tossed another piece, this time farther. The bear lumbered towards the sound, snout to the ground. It sniffed around, briefly losing focus on the tree. It was his chance. Patrick descended as silently as possible. His muscles screamed in anguish, but he ignored the pain. He moved slowly, inching down the branches, trying not to make any noise. He took a big breath and lowered himself when he was about 6 feet from the ground. His legs nearly buckled upon impact, but he forced himself to remain upright. He moved fast, snatching the gun and checking its chamber. His pulse raced when he saw he just had one shot. Realizing it had been tricked, the bear turned back towards him, rage in its eyes. Patrick focused on his aim, knowing that he couldn't afford to miss. He sighed deeply and then pressed the trigger. The shot rang out, booming throughout the forest. The bear let out a thunderous roar, staggered back, and collapsed on the ground. Patrick stood there, chest heaving, staring at the massive creature that now lay still before him. His body trembled with a mix of exhaustion, adrenaline, and the stark realization of how close he had come to death. He had wanted a trophy, but now, looking at the majestic beast, he felt only a hollow sense of regret. Patrick was grateful to be alive. He reported the kill to the authorities, but decided he no longer wanted the trophy. If anything, his ordeal taught him to respect and fear nature in all its terrifying beauty. Newlyweds Hannah and Adam Michaels, both in their late 20s, chose Montana's wild beauty for their honeymoon in early October 2012. Drawn to adventure, they wanted to escape the city and experience the raw wilderness. That's how they chose Montana as their destination, both fascinated and frightened by the state's iconic grizzly bears. Their campsite, tucked deep in the woods, had a breathtaking view of snow-capped peaks and the starry sky. That evening, they decided to prepare a small barbecue over an open flame. The smell of sizzling meat permeated the cool mountain air. Unbeknownst to them, this aroma spread far beyond their small clearing, attracting the attention of a grizzly bear prowling in the woods. The huge and hungry male bear emerged from the darkness, its eyes mirroring the blazing fires. Hannah let out a shriek which alerted her husband of the danger. Adam, hoping to scare it away, grabbed his flashlight and began shouting, waving his arms to make himself appear larger. But the bear, already agitated by the scent of food, was undeterred. It didn't want to leave, it wanted to eat. Adam's attempt at bravado backfired quickly as the bear charged, sending both him and Hannah scrambling. They ran into their tent and zipped it shut behind them. It was a poor defense against a force of nature, but it was all they had. The bear smashed into the side of the tent, shredding the fabric with its massive claws. The tent poles shattered like twigs as the bear thrashed against them, attempting to reach the terrified pair inside. Hannah and Adam realized they couldn't stay in the tent. They needed to find a way to keep themselves safe until help arrived. They crawled out the other side of the ripped tent as fast and discreetly as possible. The bear, confused by the flapping fabric, continued to paw at the tent for a bit more. They used this opportunity to put some distance between themselves and the bear. Hannah spotted a narrow opening between two enormous rocks, which formed a small, natural cave. She drew Adam towards it, knowing the rocks could offer protection. They crowded into the small area, pressing their bodies against the cold, rough stone. The cave was large enough for them to huddle in, but too small for the bear to enter. When the bear realized the tent was empty, it returned its attention to their scent. It lumbered towards them, snuffling loudly, its breath steaming in the chilly night air. Hannah and Adam held their breath as their hearts pounded. The bear approached the boulders and sniffed around the entrance of their makeshift shelter. It pushed against the rocks with its enormous paws, attempting to dislodge them. The stones shifted slightly, sending a shower of dirt down on them, but they held firm. For what felt like hours, the bear prowled outside, occasionally swiping at the rocks in frustration. Adam and Hannah kept as still as possible and quiet. They were cold and their bodies ached, but what alternative did they have? As the night progressed, they could hear the bear prowling around the campsite, sniffing for any leftover food. It ripped through their packs. The noises of snapping branches and ripping fabric echoed throughout the night. The hours passed slowly and the temperature plummeted. They shivered excessively, their bodies suffering from the cold and the cramped space. But dawn came, and with it came their salvation. The bear finally moved away from the rocks and disappeared back into the forest. Hannah and Adam waited in their hiding place, refusing to move until the sun was completely up. When they crawled out, they were stiff and sore, but still alive. The camp was wrecked. The tent was, the backpacks were shredded, and dispersed goods littered the ground. The bear had left a mark on everything. They moved to a nearby ridge to get a better signal on their satellite phone. They called for aid, shivering and tired. It wasn't long until they heard the distant sound of a helicopter coming. They were cold, exhausted, and terrified, but they had survived. The Grizzly had left them with a strong warning of the unpredictable dangers of nature. Hannah and Adam realized how close they had gotten to death and how unprepared they had been for such a frightening encounter. The wilderness was beautiful but wild and dangerous, demanding respect and caution. As the chopper hoisted them to safety, they knew this would be an encounter they'd never forget. A tale of survival against the odds in Montana's harsh mountains. 2003, the reality TV show Wild Warriors was a smash hit with viewers from all around the globe. During the show's third season, the show made history when a harrowing encounter was captured on live television. Each season, contestants faced off in distant, rugged landscapes, battling both the elements and one another for the big prize, several $100,000. The latest challenge promises the most exciting stuff yet, a night in the middle of bear country. The show producers hope to push the participants' limits and attract record-breaking viewership. They staged the challenge in a deep forest notorious for its grizzly bear population, depending on strict safety protocols and rangers to keep everyone safe. But it was not enough. Grizzly bears, native to North America, are recognized for their size, power, and unpredictable behavior. These apex predators, which can weigh up to 800 pounds and reach speeds up to 35 miles per hour, may be highly lethal when disturbed or attracted by food. The production team believed they had taken all necessary precautions, including bear-proof food containers, professional rangers on standby, and extensive instructions for participants on how to behave in bear country. However, when the sun set and the cameras rolled, they underestimated the unpredictable character of the wild. As night fell, the 6 remaining contestants, men and women who had endured weeks of suffering and exhaustion, began to set up their temporary campsite. They huddled around a tiny fire, hoping to stay warm in the swiftly cooling air. Their faces, lighted by the flames, revealed a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was ideal television for the show's creators, real tension and drama. The smell of their cooking, dehydrated meals that were now steaming hot, floated through the woods and spread far beyond their circle. Unknown to the crew and contestants, a large grizzly bear was getting closer to the camp, drawn by the scent of food. It was a large male, powerful and terrifying as it made its way through the forest. The bear was intrigued by the smells, but also by the lights and the signs of activity, which were so different from the usual quiet of the forest. The first indication that something was wrong came from a young woman called Lisa, one of the candidates, who noticed rustling in the darkness. At first she assumed it was the wind or a harmless animal. The others were more concerned with their tasks, securing tents, whispering strategies, or simply staying warm. But then the huge shape of the bear appeared from the shadows, its eyes mirroring the flickering flames. Confusion swept across the crowd like a tsunami. Some believed it was a twist included by the producers as a test of their courage. But as the bear approached, its goals became chillingly evident. It was not part of the challenge, it was very real. The cameras caught every minute as fear set in. The contestants scrambled for whatever they could find to defend themselves, with some shouting and others trying to remain as calm as possible. When the bear sensed their fear and aggression, it grew agitated. It stood on its hind legs, towering over them, and roared. Time stood for a second. The production team stationed further back realized the gravity of the situation. They started to react, yelling for the Rangers, but amid the chaos, there was a terrifying moment of clarity. The bear charged. Lisa, who was closest to the bear, became its target. She tried to back away carefully as recommended in the briefings, but her dread overwhelmed her. She tripped over a rock and fell backward, her breath catching in her throat. The bear, sensing weakness, pushed forward with incredible speed. Its muscular paw swiped down, causing her to lift her arm automatically. The claws ripped through her jacket, cutting into her flesh. She screamed in pain as she attempted to crawl away, her face pale and distorted in terror. The remaining contestants stood still, some paralyzed by fear, some pleading for help. Lisa slid onto her back, her eyes wide open in shock. She had nowhere to go. The first ranger appeared, firing a warning shot into the air just then. Another shot followed, and the bear turned its head this time, sensing the immediate danger. It retreated into the woods from where it came. Medics attended to Lisa, assessing her injuries, deep but not life-threatening. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the chaos, the fear etched on every face. Lisa's arm was bandaged and carefully moved to a safer area. Still shaken, the rest of the contestants were escorted away from the campsite. In the days that followed, there were requests to cancel the show. The show went on to have another season, but viewership plummeted. Hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden glow across an American wilderness. The Miller family had chosen the perfect spot for their weekend camping trip, far enough from the park's busy trails to feel immersed in nature, but still close to the safe confines of the main campground. After a day filled with hiking and spotting elk from a distance, Ethan Miller, an adventurous 11-year-old, found his curiosity pulling him further into the woods. His parents had always warned him to stay within sight, but the allure of exploration seemed irresistible. Just beyond the familiar clearing lay a world untamed and mysterious. He ventured deeper, his footsteps soft on the pine needles beneath him. As he moved through the underbrush, something caught his eye. Dark, hulking and massive, moving silently in the brush just ahead. His heart leaped as he froze, squinting through the trees. It was a grizzly bear, towering and unmistakable in the fading light, its head down as it gorged on a patch of ripe berries. Ethan's blood ran cold. The bear hadn't noticed him yet, but every fiber of his being screamed danger. He had been told about grizzly bears and their unpredictable nature and their power. His pulse quickened, and his legs felt weak beneath him. He knew he was too close, much too close. In an instant, the bear's head jerked upward, its deep black eyes locking onto Ethan's small, trembling form. The world seemed to freeze as they stared at one another, man and beast, an ancient predator and a vulnerable child. The bear sniffed the air, assessing the situation, and Ethan's heart pounded like a drum in his chest. Without warning, the bear charged, the ground shaking beneath its massive weight. Every instinct screamed at Ethan to run, but his legs were rooted in terror. The ranger had taught him that running could trigger the bear's chase instinct, but the fear was overwhelming. For a split second, his mind cleared, and he remembered the one thing that might save him: playing dead. He collapsed onto the ground, lying still with his face buried in the dirt, his arms protecting his neck. The world was suddenly filled with the sound of the bear's breathing, harsh, rapid, like a freight train bearing down on him. Ethan lay motionless, his body stiff with fear, willing himself to be still, to hold his breath. The bear slowed as it neared, circling him, sniffing, its snout inches from Ethan's trembling body. He could feel the heat of its breath and smell the musk of its fur. The moment stretched into an eternity. The bear pawed at him, flipping him over like a rag doll. Ethan's instinct screamed to fight, to flee, but he remained limp, his heart pounding in his throat. Suddenly, a deep, primal panic seized him. The weight of the situation overwhelmed his fragile calm, and he flinched, just a twitch, barely noticeable, but enough. The bear's reaction was immediate. It roared, rearing back before bringing down a massive paw, its claws sinking deep into Ethan's side. Pain exploded through his body, and the air left his lungs in a silent scream. The bear's claws raked across his back and side, tearing through skin and muscle like paper. He felt the searing agony, each strike driving him deeper into shock. His body jerked uncontrollably under the assault, unable to follow the safety advice he had been taught. The bear's powerful jaws clamped onto his shoulder, lifting him briefly off the ground before dropping him again, its raw strength overwhelming his small frame. He felt bones crack under the pressure, pain radiating from every part of his body. Somewhere in the chaos, Ethan heard shouting, faint, desperate cries, but they sounded far away. His father's voice was full of terror, calling his name. But the pain had swallowed everything. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the bear released him. Ethan felt the ground beneath him again as the heavy, menacing presence of the grizzly retreated, driven away by the frantic shouts of his father. It lumbered off into the woods, disappearing into the twilight, leaving behind a boy barely clinging to life. Ethan lay still, broken, his body a mass of torn flesh and blood. His father's footsteps pounded the earth as he reached him, panic evident in the trembling hands that hovered over his son's ravaged body, unsure of how to help. Ethan's breaths came in shallow gasps, each one a struggle. His father fumbled for his phone, dialing emergency services, his voice frantic as he described the scene. Within minutes that felt like hours, help arrived. Rangers, medics, and search and rescue personnel swarmed the site, assessing the extent of Ethan's injuries. A helicopter was called in. Ethan's only hope for survival was rapid evacuation. They lifted his frail, limp body onto a stretcher, working quickly to stem the blood loss. In the days that followed, news of the attack spread like wildfire. Questions arose. How had an 11-year-old wandered so far from his family? Could it have been prevented? The debate over wildlife management in national parks reignited, with some blaming the proximity of campsites to bear habitats, while others argued that the wilderness came with inherent risks. Parental supervision became a heated topic, as many questioned how such a tragedy had been allowed to unfold. But amid the controversy, the story of Ethan's resilience emerged. His recovery was long and grueling. Multiple surgeries were needed to repair the damage done by the bear's claws and teeth. He faced months of physical therapy, learning to walk again, to move without pain. The emotional scars were just as deep. Memories of the attack haunted him, replaying in his mind like a nightmare he could never wake from. Yet despite the trauma, Ethan's story became a testament to the importance of wildlife safety education. He had done what he could, remembering the lessons from the ranger, even though panic had ultimately taken over. His survival was a reminder of the fragile balance between humans and the wild, a stark warning of nature's power and unpredictability. The Arctic Research Station stood alone in the vast expanse of ice, once a beacon of scientific discovery, but now threatened by forces beyond its control. Climate change had pushed polar bears farther inland, and Dr. Elena Sorensen, the lead scientist, could feel the tension growing with each passing day. The station, designed for research, had become a dangerous refuge for the team. Reports of polar bears circling the station had increased. Hunger and desperation had driven the bears toward them, their skeletal frames a stark reminder of the shrinking ice. Supplies within the station were dwindling too. Freeze-dried meals and canned goods no longer felt reassuring as survival became more pressing. The team faced a grim realization. They were not the only ones struggling against the harsh Arctic conditions. The polar bears outside, displaced by melting ice, were just as desperate. One morning, as Elena prepared for a supply run with her colleague Mark, she noticed the silhouette of a massive bear near the station's perimeter. The sight chilled her to the bone. The bears were no longer roaming. They were closing in, attracted to the food stores. The supply run had never felt more dangerous. Elena and Mark trekked cautiously through the icy terrain, the wind biting at their exposed skin. They moved quickly, But with every step, Elena felt the weight of the bear's looming presence. She knew they were walking through what had once been the bear's hunting grounds. Mark, usually cheerful, was quiet, his eyes darting nervously as they reached the supply cache and loaded their packs. As they began their return, the wind picked up, obscuring their surroundings. Without warning, a bear emerged from behind a snowdrift, charging toward them with terrifying speed. Elena's heart pounded as she fumbled for her flare gun while Mark stumbled backward, dropping his supplies in a panic. The bear's sheer size was overwhelming as it lunged at Mark, its powerful jaws snapping inches from his body. Elena, her hands trembling, fired the flare. The red arc of light burst into the sky, momentarily blinding the bear. It hesitated, giving Mark the chance to scramble to his feet and retreat. They rushed back to the station, adrenaline propelling them through the snow, but Mark had sustained a deep gash to his leg, a brutal reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Inside, the team gathered around Mark, the atmosphere heavy with fear. The bears were becoming increasingly aggressive, and the station's defenses felt inadequate. Reinforcing doors and windows gave little comfort as the bears' constant presence outside grew more menacing. In the following days, the situation worsened. The bears clawed at the station's walls, and their roars echoed through the night. Desperation forced Elena to make a drastic decision. She proposed leaving a portion of their food supplies outside, hoping to lure the bears away. It was a risky gamble, but it might buy them time. At dawn, they placed the crate of rations far from the station and waited, hearts racing. Hours passed before a bear appeared on the horizon, drawn to the scent. Watching the bear approach the crate, Elena knew they had only delayed the inevitable. Survival in this changing world was no longer guaranteed for anyone. The bear approached cautiously, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. It paused, scanning the area, before finally lunging toward the crate. The team exhaled collectively, their plan unfolding as the bear tore into the supplies with ravenous desperation. But as the bear feasted, the tension was palpable. Drawn by the commotion, more bears began to emerge from the surrounding darkness. Soon, the scene turned chaotic as several bears jostled for a position at the crate. The researchers could see their sharp teeth and glinting eyes, a vivid reminder of the primal instinct driving these magnificent creatures. Elena's heart sank. The very distraction they had hoped would buy them time was rapidly spiraling into chaos. She knew they had to act quickly. With the bears engrossed in their feast, she devised a second plan: to create noise, using the station's sirens to draw their attention away from the crate. The decision weighed heavily on her. They were playing with fire, risking the ire of the bears, but the alternative, waiting for them to breach the station, was unthinkable. She activated the sirens, the wailing sound cutting through the silence like a knife. The bears, startled, paused and perked their ears as they turned their attention toward the sound. Elena's heart raced as she watched the bears abandon their feast, drawn into the chaos. The researchers held their breath, eyes glued to the scene unfolding outside. For a brief moment, it seemed to work, the bears retreating into the wilderness, leaving the crate behind. But then, as the noise subsided, a massive bear turned back, its eyes locked onto the station. In that instant, Elena realized they had underestimated the bears' resolve. They were not just scavengers. They were survivors, fueled by an instinct far stronger than any fear of human presence. The moment shattered the illusion of safety. The bears charged toward the station, their primal growls echoing against the stark landscape. Elena's heart raced as she and her team scrambled to reinforce their defenses. The air was filled with chaos, shouts of urgency, the sound of heavy bodies slamming against the walls, the oppressive weight of impending disaster. Just as the first bear broke through the outer barriers, a surge of panic engulfed the team. Elena's mind raced, contemplating their fate. It was a harrowing confrontation, a clash of survival instincts. As the bear lunged, Elena realized the fragility of their existence, not just hers, but of the bears too, caught in a world transformed by climate change. In the end, the station became a battleground, a tragic testament to the harsh realities of a changing planet. As the storm outside raged, so too did the battle for survival within. Each moment stretched, echoing the urgency of their plight. They were not just scientists, but witnesses to a profound and devastating truth. The fight for survival in a world losing its balance, where the hungry polar bears were not merely predators but victims of an unforgiving climate, desperate for food, as humanity grappled with the consequences of its actions. Elena stood, watching the chaos unfold, knowing that the story of the Arctic was now intertwined with theirs, a stark reminder of the thin line between coexistence and conflict, where survival came at an unimaginable cost.